Hey guys, Connor here from Shidoko Cosplays, and today I'm going to be going over with you how to make the Pauldrons from the Final Fantasy VII Remake that you see Sephiroth wearing in his new design. Specifically, I'm going to be going over the pattern that I have on my Etsy shop. If you want to check it out, it's down in the link below, or if you bought it, you probably got the link to come here. So we're going to be putting that together. I'm also going to go over with you a few different methods in this. My pattern in particular, I made for the laser engraver. So if you don't have one of those, I'm going to go over a few ways you can still get the same effect without it. We're going to go through how I put mine together with it, and we're going to go over a few different methods that you may not even need to do, but that will give you a more polished look. Basically, you can put as much into this as you feel like you need to, whether you just want to kind of get something done real quick, or if you want to take a lot of extra time and get something that's really polished. We're going to help you out here today.
First of all, if you do have access to a laser cutter, first step is easy. It's simply cut it out. It should come out looking something like this. Now included is a regular base pattern. And the reason for this is even if you're cutting it out with a laser, you're going to want to make spots for your reference marks. So just cut this out on paper, lay it flat against your piece, and this will be the same if you cut it out by hand. And just go ahead and start marking your spots. This will allow you to line it up as you contact cement it together. Should come out looking like that. Now again, if you don't have a laser cutter, this is the exact same process, except all you're going to do is trace this onto your foam and cut it out with a utility knife, and then use this pattern to go ahead and mark. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our heating. Now for heating, the way I've always found works best is I like to heat it as a slow process. You notice I'm not staying on one spot too long. I kind of go in a circular motion and just let it slowly heat. I feel like if you stay on it too long, it actually ends up heat sealing and doesn't really make it as malleable. And after you've got it good and malleable, we're going to go on to our next step, which is shaping it. Now, there's any number of ways to shape it. I've seen people who can literally just put these over their knees and do it. I am actually going to use this old empty tank because it's metal and allows me to stretch the foam. But regardless of what you use, this is the idea. You want to find a circular object with some kind of spherical property to stretch it over and give you this shape. You can use your knee, you can use anything really, just make sure you get that shape. Next up, we're going to get our contact cement out. Now, you can use any kind of brush. I personally like using sponge brushes, but I didn't have one on hand here, so as you can see, this brush works just fine. The trick is to lay it nice and thin. Now, the stuff I was using was a little older, so it's a little thicker, but that's why you want to at least spread it thin if you can. And I give it 2 coats. The trick is to let it dry nice and dry, and then give it a second coat. Let it be completely dry. It can't be at all tacky, so make sure you test it beforehand, kind of touch. If it feels sticky at all, just let it sit for a while. In general, in order for contact cement to adhere, it has to be completely dry, so check it beforehand. It shouldn't be tacky or sticky at all. If it is, it's going to be goopy and it's not going to hold. So we're going to start by go ahead and holding it out like this. As you can see, I'm kind of positioning it. I'm going to sandwich it together, and I like to use my thumbs in this. Now my thumbs go across the top. This way, as I bring the pieces together, I can lay it over the top to sandwich them and make sure that it doesn't overlap. Basically, I'm pressing together and down at the same time. My thumb guiding it through and making sure that it stays level. Now take your time, and as you go, match your registration marks and adjust as needed. If you start seeing yourself getting off a little bit, just slow down and match up those registration marks. And again, this is a slow process. If you want to do it right, you want to make sure you take your time and don't get your seams overlapped. Once it's pieced together, it should look something like this. Ain't that lovely? Now, one little trick to be aware of while you're dealing with contact cement is sometimes the seams will come apart a little bit. One thing I found very helpful when this happens is I'll go back and hit it with my heat gun just a little So you're not looking to sustain on it or overheat it. You just want to get it heated up so it gets loose again and then kind of mash it together. This usually does the trick. If you're having a really tough seam that just doesn't want to stay together, sometimes you can use super glue. So first things up, we're going to use our Loctite super glue. There's different applications for the gel and the liquid. We're going to use the gel to add the trim. Now the reason I've labeled this as an optional step, as you'll see, is that you don't actually have to cut out this trim and put it on like this. It gives it more depth and a more realistic look, but if you're just looking to just save on time, you can go ahead and just engrave it with the pattern you saw, whether that's by hand or by laser, and it'll still have that look to it, just not the depth. But we're going to go ahead and add the trim. Now I'm using 2mm EVA foam for the trim, and it should come out looking something like that. Next up, we're going to go ahead and heat seal the center of this piece, and we're going to use contact cement to go ahead and attach the trim on this. Now, as I learned while doing this, I don't necessarily recommend using contact cement over the entire piece because it takes forever to do it. What I started doing was I just hit the edges after this first piece, and I used the center with just basic super glue. So you'll see it looks something like that. Now, I went ahead and engraved the pattern on there because it makes a great reference point, so I can use that to line myself up and make sure it is exactly where it's supposed to be. And I'm just going to, again, use my thumbs to keep it all lined up and just go slow, planting it down flat. Now, this next part is a little trickier. The reason I engraved also is you can still see the engraved marks underneath it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start where we see one and connect it to the other like a game of connect the dots. That gives us our reference point of where we're going to put the top piece of trim. Same as before, I'm using 2 coats of contact cement. And after that, we're going to use super glue to just add the trim to the following pieces. Now again, you'll find these in the pattern. I recommend using 2mm foam. On this piece, since it's quite large and I'm using super glue, I actually went ahead and used a piece of EVA foam to spread the super glue. And it actually attached quite nicely. After you're done, it should come out looking something like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and heat shape it here. You could argue that you really want to heat shape it first. I went ahead and did this because I felt like it would stretch and cause it to not line up just right, and I didn't have any problems. What you may want to be aware of is that you're going to have to go back and maybe fix little things if they pop up. Just be aware of that. I didn't, but you might. I did the same thing with this other piece. I added the trim first and heat shaped. Usually not something I recommend, but it worked out okay in this case. Just be aware if you do it that you need to keep an eye on your trim so it doesn't pop off. And we're going to go ahead and fold both these pieces till we get the ideal shape. In this case, I want it to just be slightly round. Here's a little bonus step you can do. You do not have to do it this way. This is how I chose to do it. I actually used the pattern to engrave in the full shape of that circle there, and I cut my circles out on MDF. Basically, I'm using this and mashing it in with super glue. That way it gives it this illusion of depth here, like it's still sunken in but has been engraved as well. As a quick note, I actually found these eyelets in the process of making this tutorial at Michael's Crafts, and they just fit perfect and looked perfect. So we're going to go ahead and attach them with super glue. I put a little, very sparingly, on the original piece and some on the actual eyelet itself, and just mash them together. And after our added depth previously from the wood, this gives this awesome look like that. You're going to go ahead and put that on all 6 holes. I'm using the same method for my belt loop here. I engraved the shape initially so it'll have some depth, and now I'm going to go ahead and put my super glue in there, and I've cut these pieces out on acrylic. That way it'll be a little harder and give some more stability. So we're going to go ahead and mash that in, and all this is going to do is give it this look of being slightly in.
Alright, for the next step we're actually going to use this. This is just flat wire you can get from Michael's. This is actually great because what we're going to do with this is put this on the inside of our piece. We're just going to glue it in using some Loctite liquid super glue. I prefer the liquid because it bonds faster, which for this, you can have a little bit of trouble because it may not want to stay at first. You got to kind of hold it there for a second. And what this will allow you to do is adjust it as you go. If you don't have to reheat shape it, it'll also make it more stable, which will come into play later.
Now, I love using this method, but it is also admittedly a tricky one. So basically, the reason I'm using liquid is because it adheres quicker. Now, even with that, this takes some time. You've got to really kind of hold it on there. You're going to probably get super glue on your hands. It's not fun, but the reward is worth it. So basically, you can see I kind of take it slow. I sort of hold and wait for it to feel like it's sinking in. And sometimes it's going to pop off in certain spots, so you just got to kind of stick with it. But by the end, if you get it there, what you have is an adjustable piece that really has a stable form to it. Also go back and fix any pieces that come loose. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the bottom as well, just to give it that extra stability. Now, as an added bit of security here, just to keep this from popping off, I'm going to go ahead and just cover it in super glue and take a strip of 2mm foam and just slap it right on there. This will at least hold it better in place. I personally have never had any problems with it popping off. Alright, next up we need our nail head studs. Now you can get these at Hobby Lobby, and these things are super useful because you can add them on all these little points where you see that there's supposed to be a rivet. Now, my pattern already has the rivets in there, so if you don't want to do this step, again, this is optional. Alright, next up for sealing, I like to start off by taking some super high grit sandpaper, like 1000 to 2000, and just lightly go over the seams. This just kind of evens it out a bit. Next, we're going to take our DAP Quick Seal, and we're going to go ahead and fill that seam in and smooth it out. Now, I do not recommend using your hands like this. I am just a chaotic barbarian, but I've always just felt I have better control using my hands. I recommend you get any kind of tool. You can use a putty knife, any number of things, just to kind of straighten it out. Use a tool like a civilized person. Don't be a sap like me. After we've got that, we're going to go ahead and go across and heat seal it. Now we move on to my favorite step. Again, this is optional. You can heat seal it and move on to just plasti dipping it. I'm going to take Mod Podge, and I'm actually going to water it down. About 50% water, 50% Mod Podge, and I found this gives me a great result. I try to do this with every prop I can. First, I'm going to go over the seams, and you want to lay it on real thin. Remember, it's watery, so lay it on nice and thin, and all I'm going to cover is the part that's inside the trim. Now, you want to kind of watch it as it dries because it can kind of bundle up in the trim there. Now, sometimes this actually helps it blend and makes it look more realistic, and that's okay. The great thing about this method is after applying about 3 or 4 coats like this, it's super smooth and sandable, and that's what I like. So I'm going to go ahead and sand it with some super high grit.
Alright, so now we're going to go over how to achieve the pattern without the use of a laser etcher or a Cricut or anything like that. So, basically the way you want to go about doing it without any of those things is you've got your pattern here. And what we're going to do with that is you have 3 different sections here. We're going to go ahead and cut out the 2 outward sections on a thicker foam, probably 10mm, and this little inward one on something a little thinner. That's going to help us create that valley without having to take the time to etch it in or anything like that. Probably about 6mm foam will do for the inner valley. So again, you're going to want to separate these patterns onto your paper and chop them out like that. So when you're done, you should end up with something like this. You got your bigger piece, your thinner valley on the inside, and the outward piece that's going to go out there. Basically, we're going to assemble this the same as before with contact cement. I'm going to walk you through that. Just to save on time, I'm not going to go through the process of remaking a whole pauldron this way. I'm just going to do part of this so you can get the idea and go from there, because this method is a little lengthier, but it works great.
So again, same as before, we're going to apply 2 layers here thinly across, and use our thumb to line up the bottoms of this, and the difference in depth is essentially going to create you this little valley. And for my Cricut cutter users out there, I've actually included in my pattern the standalone pattern to itself. This way you can just Cricut out all that detailing and glue it into this valley with this exact same method. You should end up with something like this.
Alright guys, for the next part you're going to want to find either the smallest possible rivets you can, either at Joann's or Michael's or wherever your craft store of choice is. See what you can find for the smallest possible rivets for the manual pattern. Now, to be honest, with all the craziness going on in the world, all of the craft stores around me are not fully stocked up yet, so I was not able to get my hands on the things I want to use. So I'm not going to be able to use rivets. It really doesn't matter what you use as long as you use something that you can stick into the foam that gives you that nice little outward sticking point. So I'm going to have to get a little creative myself, but hey, being a cosplayer means being creative, so let's go.
Okay, so what I came up with is all I really have on hand are these stick pins used for sewing. I do not recommend using these because you have to break each one to make sure that it doesn't have the needle going forth. But this is just me kind of showing you an example of how you can really get creative and just use anything, really. I recommend finding small rivets or something that's actually useful and meant for this. I don't recommend going this route, but we're going to do it anyways just to show you the method. So you go ahead and stick one in here, and you're going to apply super glue on the left, right side, and in front of it. Now you're going to take either twine, wire, leather, whatever you choose to do, and you're going to wrap it around your initial spot here. Now in the process of doing this, I learned that the best way to do this is go ahead and stick all your pins in at once. Don't do it one at a time like you see me doing here. Stick them all in, space them all out evenly, and then it just makes it 1,000 times easier. In fact, you'll actually see I kind of learned that as I go here. Now, as you get to the next one, basically what you're going to do is you're going to wrap it around like that. And you're essentially going to do a crisscross pattern across every single stick pin. Now, the trick to making this look right is alternating which one's on top between each pin. So every time you go between each pin, it should twist around, and the one that was on the bottom last should be on the top this time. After you've gone through the full process, it should look like this. And again, this is me with not having any supplies whatsoever. So if you don't have a laser, don't feel discouraged or think you're not going to be able to get a great pattern. You can actually get a better one. So again, you're not limited by not having a laser. Get inventive and go for it. Next up, plasti dipping. Now the trick for me in plasti dipping is what I've found to make it lay smooth is I start by heating it up under some warm water. And I know this may seem like obvious advice, but shake it for the full minute it advises you to. I try and keep my distance, and I don't ever stay on one spot. Be patient with it and trust the process. So go a little slow and make sure it lays evenly, because if you stay on one spot or get frustrated that you're not getting coverage, you're going to end up clumping it up and having it look, well, fake. So go slow and get full coverage. It should look something like that. Now I'm going to do 3 coats, and we're also going to repeat the process for the other props. After that, I use Rust-Oleum Bright Reflective Finish Metallic. I find this at AutoZone, and this can is powerful. So the trick to this is keep your distance, and again, don't really stay on one spot too long. Get slow coverage and don't overdo it, because this paint will clump up. But after you're done, you should get a nice sheen finish like that. Now this is going to be our base coat, but we're not done yet. Oh baby. So after that, we're going to use Rust-Oleum's Metallic Pearl Mist, because if you look in the game, it has kind of a white color to it. Now this, we're not trying to get full coverage. You're kind of misting it over it. So you see I'm kind of hitting in spurts, almost like I'm watering a fern or something. And again, this is so that the chrome underneath does still shine through a bit, but we want it to look more whitish overall. And we're going to repeat the process for the others as well. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some very fine steel wool and just kind of slightly buff it out. This will both give it kind of a weathered look, but also sort of buff between those 2 layers. Don't overdo it, because you can end up really scratching your piece on this, but go slow, take your time. And again, repeat the process for the other pieces. After that, my favorite method of weathering is I start with a little bit of black paint and I fill it up with water. So you should have a piece that's about 1/3 black paint and 2/3 water. Shake it up really thoroughly and just kind of go nuts into those crevices. Now the reason I like this is because what you're going to do is you're going to get it in there, and then you can just wipe it right off, and what it'll leave behind is it'll leave a sort of faded, subtle weathering, and you can adjust as you go. So if it's not dark enough, you can just keep hitting it. And also it's real good at getting in these crevices, so this is a nice way to be lenient on any mistakes. So if you put something on there and you're like, ah man, it wasn't good enough, you can just go back and wipe it off. Now, honestly, it even got to the point where in order to get some really dark lines, I started just pouring this directly onto the trim and just letting it soak in. And again, you're going to judge for yourself what you want it to look like. If you want it to be weathered, you can do this. If you want it to be sheen, you can stop at the first coat. Do whatever you like. Make your version of this. My personal take on Sephiroth was that he was somebody who never really took battle damage, but he also wasn't necessarily someone who really gave much of a crap about taking care of his armor because he didn't have to, so it has a little bit of a weathered look to it, but not a really damaged one. And again, make sure you get in all those little crevices, parts where you would see metal actually start to wear down first. And after we're done, there she is. And oh man, is she beautiful.
And that's how we do it. And finally, guys, it's time for the finishing touch, the pièce de résistance of the whole piece. I probably should have put that somewhere else. Guys, if you like what you saw in the video here today, or you learned something from it, go give me a like and subscribe down below. I'd appreciate it. Let me know how I did in the comments. This is my first tutorial, so I'm always open to any kind of feedback. Also, if you want to find me, I'm on Instagram and Facebook under Shidoko Productions. I'm going to have everything on there from tips that I'm learning, tricks, work in progress videos, film work, pretty much a little bit of everything you can find I'm doing right on there. So if you want to learn more, just keep up to date with what I'm doing, check me out there. And as always, thank you guys so much for coming and checking this out. Have fun crafting, and again, thank you.